based in Ghana and I look after West Africa, so I work very closely with two great trade commissioners, Andrew Barnes in Ghana and Claire in Nigeria. But I also have a role in Austrade where I look after education for Middle East and Africa. So I work closely with a lot of business development managers across the region. So I'm pretty passionate about this, and I think this is actually a really good news story for Australia. And I definitely see, I think it's been well alluded to, that in the future education is going to be, really important for what we do. To start with, a big population, a big young population, and the population growth that's taking place, and also how the median age is going to stay relatively young, especially compared to the rest of the world. I think if you have a look at some of the UN statistics, I think Nigeria, the median age is going to stay around 20 out to 2050. Compared to China, Indonesia and India, which people think are young populations, but will probably be all over 40 at that time as well. With regards to education, look, it's going to be broad as well. I guess at the moment, the area that Austrade's focusing on is higher education in terms of what we're doing. There's a number of reasons for that. One of them is, and I think it's been brought up from a student visa point of view, it's probably an area that we're seeing a little bit more suitable for Australian institutions. I think also too, we were talking about literacy, but Africa is relatively new to a lot of Australian institutions. So I'll talk about a trade mission we're doing or an education mission. It's only the fourth one we've done for education. You compare that to Canada, UK, US, which are up to their 20th and 30th, etc. And it's a really good snapshot about, what Austrade's doing in market, how we're trying to work closely, with other government agencies, but also I think the buy-in we're getting from Australian institutions as well. So it's definitely a mutual beneficial solution. But with regards to this event, it's the fourth one we've done in Sub Saharan Africa, and I've been involved in 3 of them. And up until last year, it was only West Africa. So we looked at Ghana and Nigeria, and really because of universities and organisations, their suggestions, their demand, we're actually doing Nairobi for the first year coming up. So it'll be Kenya, as mentioned there, Kenya, Ghana, and then Abuja and Lagos in Nigeria. And it mentions there that it is a flagship event for us, 20 institutions, it's actually 22. So we're getting a lot of demand coming from that, and actually 4 universities or 4 institutions from Western Australia. So we've got Curtin coming along, Edith County University, Murdoch, and also University of Western Australia. And I think particularly for Perth, there are strong linkages. I think if you have a look, particularly with the East Coast and Nairobi. So I think it's going to go well for Australia, but also in particular Western Australia as well. I guess we look at it very holistically, and it's not just about student recruitment. Yes, universities are coming over here, they're pitching themselves to students about coming to study in Australia and the great Australian lifestyle and the benefits of study. But we are also working closely with the alumni, and I think alumni was brought up before about how they are great ambassadors, they've got a great story to tell, and also how can we help them when they return to Africa. We also get involved with Department of Home Affairs. So when we do these events, we'll have an exhibition where we'll have the universities that are kind of either set out in their offices or their little booths, and they'll pitch themselves to students. But we'll also have a seminar room, and we'll have Department of Home Affairs talk about the student visa process. We'll also have the alumni talk about living in Australia, lifestyle. And this year we're also getting the Victorian government pitching themselves, and also Study Adelaide. So we are trying to make it quite holistic in terms of not just about recruitment, but also looking at other aspects as well. We also have receptions, and we're very grateful to the assistance we get from the High Commissions. So look, it is good the way we're doing it, and we're getting a great buy-in from Australian institutions. It was remiss of me not to probably go back and just talk about, why we're doing this, and it's just not population we see. We see a young population. I think we've also mentioned emerging middle class that definitely wants a good quality education, and they're no different to what happens in other parts of the world. Also, with this growing young aspirational population, we're also seeing the capacity of countries not really being able to cater for the demand. So even if they do want to work in, study in their own respective nations, a lot of times demand's greater than supply. And there's a statistic, I think, from Nigeria that every year the amount of students that finish high school and want to go on to further education exceeds the ability to go to university by about a million people annually. So there is the demand that's there. I would also say the Australian universities are really buying in, and a lot of it's because of diversification, or the need for diversification. You know, I think anyone here, you've read regularly about how universities are perceived to be too dependent on China and India. And they are looking at the future, not just next year, but the next 5 to 10 years. They're having a look at those projections put up about population, growing emerging middle class, speaking English, Commonwealth system, so many similarities. It works out well. The other thing that's boding well for Australia is at the moment we're not the UK or the US. So they have been the traditional markets that have been the focus, particularly for countries such as Nigeria, Ghana, Kenya. So it's actually Australia and Canada that are in the relatively sweet spots at the moment. But growingly, we're seeing countries like Ireland and others really pitch their wares as well. So that's the event that's coming up. I'm getting involved in it. I'm really looking forward to it. And look, post-event, we obviously want to tell about what's happened, what are lessons learned, etc. Another area, Australia's involved with that I'll talk a little bit about here is agribusiness and food. And going back again as to what are the drivers, what's taking place for agribusiness and food, I'll break this down into the two components and talk about food first. That, again, we're seeing a rising middle class. We're seeing people, a growing expatriate community that, is looking at good quality food. Is looking at premium food in particular. And some of the biggest proponents of this are actually alumni. People that have studied overseas, lived in Australia, got a good quality for great Margaret River wine or products, go back home and want to kind of maybe get them themselves or sell it onwards. So with regards to that, we are seeing a lot of interest in food. In terms of, how large that demand is, I would say it's very niche at the moment. You are competing against South Africa, which has, and I see there's quite a few South Africans in the room. There's great food over there. That does cater for the market as well. Also, logistics can be a bit of an issue, getting food, and non-tariff barriers with regards to, I would say, sometimes just not allowing food in. So I know, for example, Nigeria, it's quite tough to get meat in. I think it's on the exclusion lists, etc. I think it was mentioned one of the ways that we are trying to look at that is look at Gulf food. So we are trying to go up to Dubai. A lot of Australian companies have a presence in Dubai or are doing food services there, and how do we get them to come down to West Africa, East Africa, etc. And look, we've been doing that probably now for about 2 years, I think fairly heavily, and we are getting a bit of interest, but it is taking a bit of time. With regards to agribusiness, look, you have to realise that, I think, and there's people that are a lot more literate about Africa in the room, the potential's huge. I was at the Australia-Africa Universities Network, and there was the High Commissioner for Kenya, who's based in Canberra. I think he's the Dean at the moment. And I think he bluntly said the future for employment, the future for the youth in Africa is through agribusiness. It is a big contributor for employment. And I think this is, again, where technology is going to play a fundamental role. And this is where Australia could play a big part. There's quite a few similarities in how we use water, how we work over vast distances, quality control, and also how we raise productivity. So it is something that we are looking to get engaged in. Arid farming techniques, genetics, abattoir management, etc. I guess just kind of showcases what Australia's doing within a particular sector is a gourmet Africa, and this is really displaying what we do in premium food. So did target the premium food sector and really looked at some of the tourism areas. So I think Kim had the tough job of going to Mauritius, Zanzibar, wasn't it, Kim?
Someone had to do it.
And a few other markets, and it was really promoting premium wine, but also food, and also the I think the thing that was underestimated was actually the skills and the training around hospitality as well. And look, again, we got a good reception, particularly around a lot of the hotels that were very keen, to have diversity on their wine list with wine and products, etc. So if I can leave you with 4 key points, mining is probably the backbone for the Australian engagement in Africa, and it's not going to change anytime soon, in my opinion. Particularly being based in West Africa, it is a mining hotspot at the moment. Particularly for those who have been at the Africa Down Under conference, you would have heard from a lot of mining companies, and also the growing importance of security, which again, I do have to point out the great work my colleague Andrew Barnes has done and some of his staff at the High Commission in Ghana. Rapid population growth, look, that's just going to change the dynamics across so many sectors. You know, we've talked about education. I think healthcare is a big sleeper when you have a look at it. Again, when you get emerging middle class, you also get new kind of healthcare needs as well. Obviously, infrastructure, power generation. Mobile technology and the applications, and again, that's pervasive across all sectors. Ed tech, ag tech, food tech. It's just limitless, and I think what it really does, it brings a whole new audience that you can address. You know, Kim was talking about financial inclusion. Growingly too, we're seeing a lot of governments really shift to getting online services, which is great from a transparency point of view. I think it's also great from a regulatory point of view, and it increases confidence in a lot of industries as well. I've been doing a bit of work on e-commerce about in Sub Saharan Africa, and it's getting a lot of interest, a lot of investment. Some people might be familiar with Jamia, doing work in Nigeria, Kenya. I think Takealot is quite a big player down in Southern Africa. But again, there's opportunities in the future for Australian companies to engage in that. And I guess the last one there, and I think it's been spoken about nearly every conference, whether it was the Universities Network, Africa Down Under, other ones, is just the potential for the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, for it to make a big impact.